I had kind of one of the mentors at that internship tell me to be the person that raises your hand for the things that no one wants to do. And you will, one, be challenged, and you'll likely fail periodically, but you'll learn from that. And so I've kept that in the back of my mind, and I've done that frequently through my career. And yes, I've volunteered to do things that were way out of my comfort zone, but it helped broaden my scope and my experience. The reality is there's always going to be way more security gaps than you can fix. And it is, from a security team and security leaders perspective, is to really understand for your organization, for your business, for your environment, what are the things that need to be prioritized. I can buy an established product and have to change how my team or my company operates to fit the product, or I can work closely with the founding team at a startup that I think is a very strong team in solving a problem, and we can work together to implement a solution in a way that is seamlessly integrated into how we operate. Trying to have people change their process and their ways of working is very, very challenging. So if you find a way to just embed into what they're already doing, it's much easier.
Well, hi, Mandy. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I just want to give a brief background to our listeners of who you are, what we're doing in the studio today. So Mandy is actually a CISO at Elastic, and you're also an investor, board member, educator. You have over 2 decades of cybersecurity experience, which is insane. You touched upon so many areas. I think it would be super fun for our listeners to know all your journey, all your background. And your education history is also quite intriguing. You hold a JD, a Master's in Management, Information Systems. You authored multiple books. So maybe just to kick things off, could you share about your educational background? Because you studied accounting, information systems, and then you even been called to the bar. So what's the story behind it, and what brought you to cybersecurity?
Sure. So I think the core is I've always loved learning. My mom and all of her sisters, they were all teachers. And so I think it was just kind of embedded and ingrained in me from the very beginning. But it was also, at the time that I grew up, it was, technology was around, but it wasn't front and center. And so while I loved technology and had my first computer when I was 9 and did a lot of, played around with a lot of tech, I didn't see what a career path could be within security. And I really enjoyed business. So that's why I went into accounting. And it was during my accounting studies that I continued the love of tech and played with all the new toys and things that came out, but started to see, and through the introduction of one of my accounting professors, kind of the combination of accounting and technology as it related to systems auditing. So auditing the systems that were generating the numbers for financial statements. And so I started to look into that area because it was this perfect combination of business and technology that I really enjoyed. And with that, I was able to also, as part of the program, got a master's in management information systems. Silly things the state of Texas did for the CPA requirements is what created that program. And then once I got into the systems auditing, I loved going to different companies, just learning about different industries, how different companies operated, seeing the different cultures that each company had. And then also, while they were all using maybe the same technology, Windows NT was big technology at the time, or AS400s, how they used them, how they configured them, it was also different. So it was just really fascinating to get this broad experience and this breadth of understanding of how different things could be. And then I found I really enjoyed getting much more into the technical aspects of security. So after doing systems auditing for a while and constantly getting bored because you audit one Windows system, you audit 50, their process is the same. Mm-hmm. I get bored pretty quickly. So then going into kind of more core security consulting and security architecture. And at that time, it's height of the first .com boom in the early 2000s. So I came out to Silicon Valley just to be in the heart of it. So I was in heaven. It was like my love of tech, and I was just in the place where it was all happening. And it was there that I found that I just started to apply, in my consulting experience and just seeing all the different paths. And as security was becoming much more important in organizations, certainly as the internet was continuing to grow and expand and what it would become, just being able to then, I found I really enjoyed going into an organization and understanding the industry, the culture, the tech stack, and how to craft a security program that would be successful in that environment. Because no two companies are the same and no two security programs should be the same. So I found I really enjoyed taking that and kind of the amalgamation of all my consulting and systems auditing experience, my business experience, my tech experience, and gave me perspectives. I could come at challenges from different perspectives and try to put myself in the shoes or the mindsets of many different people to help ensure that what we were doing was both going to be effective in security, but also something that was more welcome and something that folks weren't necessarily trying to fight or push back against.
That's an amazing approach. And I think I was talking to also one CISO previously, and she was also mentioning that, hey, back at that time, security was perceived as something that people had to fight. So how do you think, as you were growing along your career ladder, right? How did you adopt this culture, whichever organization you were in, that it wasn't like I'm against you, but we are together culture?
I found it's, again, back to education as being a common theme in my career, but it's back to just that making folks aware and being transparent of, as much as you can, what's happening. And a lot of times folks were fighting back either because we were trying to force a very specific way of doing things on them, or they just didn't understand. And so the combination of just explaining the why and answering any questions that they have and helping them understand what's really happening around the organization. Because at that time, hacking wasn't kind of in the news every day, and people were oftentimes just flabbergasted. Just, they don't think that way. So it's like, why would someone want to do that? And just a lot of, yes, people are doing this, and here's what we need to do to help protect our organization and protect ourselves. And then also coming at it from not just as we're the security team and we're going to tell you how to do your job. It was also then, okay, here's the why. Here's kind of, objectives and things that we need to achieve to help with this why. Now let's work together and figure out, how do you operate? How does your team operate? What are your processes? And how can we, as best as we can, kind of work within those processes so it doesn't feel like something that's just so either bolted on or completely, out of step with how you operate day to day. Yeah,
it's much better approach than having this "I told you so" approach. And I did notice that whichever company you were joining, you actually spent quite a number of years. And I'm wondering if this is something you found helpful as you were cultivating this culture. So is there a specific rationale? Why did you choose to be at a certain company for quite some time? And would you advise any aspiring professionals to follow the same path and do the same?
I think different individuals have different goals and paths. For me, I was changing jobs very quickly when I was early in my career, and got feedback at the time that, hey, I needed to stay somewhere a little bit longer to show that I could. And so that's when I stayed at TiVo for 4 years and went in, and then I went to MassMutual in Massachusetts. I was there for 13 years. And I said before, I get bored very easily. And it was early in my career when I was starting to get bored, I'd go to a new company. It's always exciting to go to a new company, meet new folks, learn new things about whether it's a different industry, different organization. But when I needed to kind of force myself to stay, I had to relearn for myself or learn new ways for myself. How do I continue learning in an organization? And I started to look at it more as, when you hit those challenging spots, kind of the learnings of working through them, or the learnings of, how can I challenge myself? How can I keep myself engaged and excited? And also a lot of that, as I moved into more senior roles in management, gave me a lot of different opportunities to do that as well. And then at MassMutual, I never expected to stay there 13 years. I expected when I went in to stay 3 to 5, but it was really every 18 to 24 months, there was something changing, whether it was new businesses, new business lines, new technology as internet and then moving into mobile and cloud, and all of that was rapidly shifting, or threat landscape changes. So I was doing something different every 18 to 24 months, and being in financial services, always a very top target for threat actors. So really gained, really the core of my experience as a security leader in the financial services space there, and had got either visibility or direct experience in pretty much every facet of information security and risk management and risk overall, and really just use that as a core of, and even if I wasn't necessarily enjoying the specific role I was in, there was always things I was learning, and I tried to, one, look at it from that perspective, and also realize that I'm only going to really be in this role for 18 to 24 months, so learn what I can. But it's also, I had, early in my career, when I was doing some internships, I had kind of one of the mentors at that internship tell me to, be the person that raises your hand for the things that no one wants to do. And you will, one, be challenged, and you'll likely fail periodically, but you'll learn from that. And so I've kept that in the back of my mind, and I've done that frequently through my career. And yes, I've volunteered to do things that were way out of my comfort zone, but it helped broaden my scope and my experience. And yeah, I wasn't necessarily the best at it, and it wasn't suited to my kind of core strengths, but I was able to learn some new skills and know what I really enjoyed, and know some of the things that I would prefer to have others on the team take care of. But yeah, I always approach things with, what can I learn? How can I keep challenging myself? And then, finally felt I was getting a bit complacent after 13 years, and wanted to kind of get back into technology and startup space. And that's what brought me to Elastic.
Yeah. If I could just summarize your experience and different touch points that you had throughout your career, one word I would use is resilience, whether it was someone throwing the task that no one else wanted to do, or whether it was being persistent enough to stay in one company for so many years that, at every company at a certain point, there are certain politics that you have to navigate, to go through technology as it's evolving. So having this mindset of resilience is super important. But when it comes to today's world, right, we are in the middle of RSA. So many emerging technologies are showcasing, talking about latest threats out there. How do you encourage people around to stay focused on what is really important and maintaining this, perseverance to whatever is really important?
It's challenging in today's world, and certainly as someone that loves to test out and try out new things, I have to fight myself sometimes to just say, focus on the fundamentals, focus on the core, and really understanding for your organization, what are the core risks, what are the core security gaps that you need to work on. Sometimes that may mean looking at new solutions, new tools. Oftentimes, there's a whole lot you can achieve in improving a security posture of just focusing on the fundamentals, focusing on the boring stuff, and looking at how do we do the boring stuff more effectively, keeping patches up to date, or looking at how we're managing all of our configurations, and is there a way we could do that differently to really lessen the overall kind of environment that attackers could look to go after. And then it's being very mindful early in my career, and when I work with folks earlier in their career, it's the concept that everything is bad and we have to fix all of these issues. And I'm guilty of it myself early in my career of just, we have all of these security issues and we're not fixing them, and we need to fix all of them. And the reality is there's always going to be way more security gaps than you can fix. And it is, from a security team and security leaders perspective, is to really understand for your organization, for your business, for your environment, what are the things that need to be prioritized, either what presents the greatest risk to the organization, or what are the things that could have a significant impact, either in reputation or morale, if not directly in revenue and in monetary impacts. But it's also looking at it from the perspective of the bigger picture. And oftentimes there's one or two controls you can implement that would have a significant impact across multiple threats. Yeah. And so looking at what are those things that have a broader amplification than maybe going in and hitting this one niche area at this point in time. And so it's different for every organization. And that's where, for me, also being in security, it's fun because it is different. It's not the same thing in every organization. You have the same objectives, you have the same principles, but they're manifested in so many different ways in different places.
What do you think those fundamentals are? We spoke about fundamentals, but, different people define it differently. So what is it for you, and what are maybe emerging fundamentals, if I can use that word, that you think security professionals have to focus more on?
I would say core fundamentals that I think we often not lose sight of, but move away from oftentimes because we don't have direct control over the processes is one, if you look at it from your employees and the devices that you give employees to do their jobs, just ensuring that there's a very secure, as best for your organization, configuration for that. And when I say secure configuration, oftentimes there should be different configurations within the organization for different roles. And that's always a challenge point of finding that balance between how can folks continue to be effective in their roles and having the organization be secure. And the philosophy I've taken on for that is, because early in my career, I would try to push, this is the one thing we need to do in the organization. And that worked well for some teams, and it works very not well for other teams. And so I've taken much more of an approach as I've moved along in my career of it's okay to have multiple approaches, multiple configurations to achieve the same objective in different places with different teams. And it may create more work for us. It usually does. But in the end of the day, it helps with the security posture because you're not having people try to go around it. You're not having people constantly try to fight the controls that you're putting in place. So that's one, whether that's employee devices, whether it's servers, physical servers, cloud servers, workloads, just what is that default configuration that needs to be in place. And then for me, it's also understanding what are all the security capabilities in both the products and tools you already have. There's so many capabilities that we just don't take advantage of, either because we don't know or we see the new shiny tool over here and we want to use that. But if we take the time to learn what we have, and oftentimes that means teams moving out of their silos and understanding, there's this security tool over here that this team is using that I don't really know a lot about. But once they learn more about it, realize that, hey, there's functionality there that would be very useful in what I do. And so just trying to open up and broaden the knowledge across, whether it's just the security team or oftentimes the security and the IT teams, and being comfortable sharing tools and really breaking down those silos. And if you focus on those two things, you can have a tremendous impact and have a very strong security program on continuing to ensure that your organization has a pretty resilient security posture.
They really have to adopt your, curiosity and openness to learn, because I think for a lot of security teams, fundamentally, when you have this issue that just arises, you're just thinking, okay, I just have to fix it. But then you don't really think, okay, this tool can fix this issue as well. You kind of shift your focus to something else. And I can understand just psychologically how it can be difficult. So it's a little bit of a mindset configuration to fix. But what do you think are some of the evolving issues that just happened to appear recently that you think people should really pay a little more attention to? Because thanks to attackers, we have such an evolving space, because without them, we wouldn't have so many tools. So what are some of the evolving threats that you see today that you might have not seen 5 years ago?
And I think we've been talking about ransomware for a number of years, and that still continues to be something that folks need to protect against. What I see more from an emerging perspective is just the nation state threat actors. And while they've been operating for a number of years, it's just in the last year or so that from a kind of public consciousness has really been brought to the forefront. Before it was, as security professionals, we knew things were going on and knew that there were really high skilled teams in certain countries that were using that approach to further their objectives. But now it's more out in the open. Because before they were targeting specific companies to get what they wanted, whether it was intellectual property or some type of foothold in an organization. Now they're going after anyone, whenever they can. And what that's introducing is certainly for a lot of small, medium businesses, even individuals, more on the consumer side, and using home routers and things like that as launch points, that it's now everyone's impacted. And how do we need to think about that? What are things that we need and should do differently? So it's those conversations and how they're continuing to emerge and evolve is one area. And then, of course, we're at RSA, and we can't have any conversation at RSA without mentioning AI, and certainly agentic AI being the topic of the day here. And I mean, that's the new emerging place. And if we look at, I think there's tremendous potential for what AI can bring us today, and as that technology evolves in the future. But how do we, what are some of the risks that come with that? We're going to continue to learn what they are, just as threat actors are going to continue to look at how to take advantage of it. And that cycle will just continue in a new place. And I think there's a lot of power. It can certainly both, I'd say work nonstop because it's a system and then it can just keep doing its thing. But it can help us gain insights into significant amounts of data and give us perspectives and maybe help us see trends that we just couldn't see before because we didn't have the ability to go that deep into some of the analysis. And I think it'll change the landscape both of how security teams operate, but also what we have to do for security. If we're looking at having, if agents evolve into workers and playing roles in an organization, there's if you look at a worker in the same context of kind of an employee and all the access and behaviors and things that happen there, it's going to take that and magnify it by many, many times of just because of the speed, scale, velocity, it's going to increase. There's things that we need to do, and we're going to need to operate at a completely different speed than we do today, which will necessitate some pretty significant changes in how we approach our day-to-day jobs.
Definitely. And I think especially on the topic of AI agents and everything, what is happening today is that organizations finally have this visibility, deeper visibility in whatever is going on. And one of the conversations that I keep on hearing these days is, there is so much connection between our personal and work life. And it's becoming a little harder for organization to distinguish between the two. Like, how do we impose control on one, but then an attacker would go and target the personal identity and then get access to the work identity? And with the browser becoming the entry point, I'm wondering, what is your take on this field of security, and how do you see it evolving in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think first, I see it as a continuation of an evolution that's been happening since essentially the iPhone came out, and that whole consumerization of IT. Add to that the pandemic and the behavior changes that the pandemic created, certainly within work environments, but also more just within individuals, and a realization that, hey, I can work differently and I may want to work differently. And what that turned into is essentially kind of anytime, any place type of availability from a work perspective. And to do that, the browser is the natural extension, because that's the thing that's on every device and the thing that you can carry and more easily sync across. And so, yes, I see that continuing, and definitely see that as a new threat that we need to pay more attention to. Certainly saw it over the December 2024 time with some initial news of malicious browser extensions. And attackers are really, really creative and really good at finding those gaps of things that we're now using all the time, but there's still some spaces for them to take advantage of. And browsers are that thing today, whether it's malicious browser extensions, session hijacking, and finding ways to bypass the controls that we've been putting in place to stop the prior activities that they were doing. And so, yeah, just that whole process continues. And whether it's browsers today, and it'll be, I anticipate, something AI, LLM related in the future. That's why I enjoy security, because there's always something new going on.
There is always something new going on. And I think the issue that you were referring to in December, right? It was the cyber Haven attack, right? When the developer was compromised with OAuth scope attack. Was it this instance that you were referring to, or
there were a few different ones happening about the same time. I don't remember the exact specifics.
How do you see organizations really adopting to all of these evolving threats? Like, is it something that people think, okay, we have to be on top of it? Or is it something that, is still dark space and needs to be discovered?
It's a little bit of both. And this is where folks talk about the security poverty line, and you see those companies that have the budget, have the focus, have the means to have their own security team, have a very strong focus on security, and do so whether it's for regulatory reasons because of their industry, or to from business perspectives, if they didn't have it, it would really impact just the existence of the organization and their revenue. But you have a lot of smaller organizations where today, as we mentioned before, nation-state actors are taking advantage of them, but they don't have the budget, they don't have the means, they don't have the need to build a security team, other than the fact that they have the potential of being a target. And so it's, how do we, certainly as an industry, how do we help everyone have the capabilities that they need? Some of that is, of course, core technologies that every business uses. Let's do secure by default. Let's make all the security measures just the thing that is the native experience for folks. But how do we also look at, how do we make some of these security controls and things, whether it's less complex or less expensive, and just help broaden, because it's a collective experience, and if it's not just me protecting my own organization, there's that, but there's certainly if you get into supply chain, it's also helping global supply chain. We're all interconnected, and there's more and more things that come out that help us see that every day, and we need that transparency, we need that knowledge sharing, and to be helping each other to be successful.
So just in case for our listeners, how would you exactly define the security poverty line? So I honestly, I haven't heard that term used too frequently. So maybe for anyone who doesn't know what it is.
I can't recall right now who used it first and really started that concept, but it is kind of that line of size, budget of an organization, and where they don't have the need to either bring in the team while they use the technology, and they have some of the security gaps potentially either in the technology they're using or processes. It's just not either, does it need to be a focus? It isn't a focus, and they should be able to rely on whether this their service providers or technology providers to help protect them. To, you look at, at the farthest extreme, the really large global multinational companies that have significant budgets and have teams of hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. And that's a pretty significant discrepancy. And you can't expect a 5-employee organization to have the same as a 200,000 employee organization. But it's often very similar technology, if not the same technology, the same type of threats. And how can we close that and not have such extremes?
Yeah, and especially in your experience, you work for such large organizations, and right now you're actually advising multiple companies out there. How would you advise smaller companies to navigate this challenge, right? Because I'm sure when you work in financial services, this is such a targeted industry, right? And of course, you just have this budget, have this controls in place, have this team in place. How would you advise smaller companies to navigate this difficulty?
Yeah, I think certainly the explosion and usage of SaaS and being able to gain a lot of things as a service is very helpful. And that helps remove a whole host of areas of controls because you're not running infrastructure. You're not needing to manage that yourself. But it doesn't remove responsibilities that you have as a user. So whether shared responsibility model, shared fate model, you as a customer still need to pay close attention to just how you're accessing that service. And so I think it's better education on what as a customer of this do you really need to pay attention to and why, and have an understanding of then my service provider is handling all of these other aspects for me. So that's one piece. I think SaaS has certainly a strong role in it, as long as the customer understand what their roles and responsibilities are. And then I see a significant growth in managed security service providers of just essentially outsourcing that capability. And I think back to the AI topic, I think this is where MSSPs and starting to use AI. I've used MSSPs in my career in the past, and I found them challenging just because it was at larger organizations and they weren't able to really understand the context of the environment that I was working in. Not so much of an issue in smaller organizations, but MSSPs and using AI and be able to get that bigger picture much more quickly and make those connections. I think there's a significant growth ahead in MSSPs, more than what we're even seeing today.
Yeah, it's good to see more solutions out there being more tailored to different enterprises. Whether you're a large enterprise, then there is one solution for you. When you're smaller, there is something else for you. What really brought you towards advising companies then? I know that you're at the forefront of so many challenges, but was there any external, internal motivation that kind of inspired you to move towards advising, investing into companies?
I think if you look holistically at the security ecosystem, kind of R&D, all the research, most of the new ideas are coming out of startups. And so I originally got close to the startup community when I was in consulting of just learning what were the new approaches and what were some of the new ideas coming out. So that was certainly when web application security was just becoming a thing, and it was the startups that were helping to solve those challenges. And then just continuing to stay close to that environment and that ecosystem, because it's continued to be the place where you would find whether it's solutions for new threat vectors or new approaches to existing problems. And then I got much more involved when I moved over into Elastic, because I moved over pre-pandemic, and Elastic was a globally distributed, fully remote, cloud native, so SaaS offerings for all of our business services. We were running on all the hyperscalers for our SaaS offerings to customers, so AWS, Azure, GCP, and most of the security solutions at the time were designed to work on an on-prem infrastructure and get visibility by getting into your network. It's like, as a fully distributed organization, I don't have a network to get you visibility into. So the key control points were at very different places, and there weren't many existing solutions that worked well in that environment. And so back to trying to find the best solutions for how teams operate, working very closely with startups and working with some startups and design partnerships and working together to really create a solution that works well in our environment. Then the pandemic came, and kind of everyone in the world had the same challenge. So there was a pretty significant, rapid shift in some of those approaches. But for me, it's just, Elastic as a company, we strive to stay, thought leadership, very forward leaning on search and the things that we're doing in the company, and look to do the same things on the security side. And so staying close with different startups and different ideas. And for me, it's often just back to, I can buy an established product and have to kind of change how my team or my company operates to fit the product, or I can work closely with a founding team at a startup that I think is a very strong team and solving a problem, and we can work together to implement a solution in a way that is seamlessly integrated into how we operate. And that helps significantly reduce friction if you're looking at trying to have people change their process and their ways of working is very, very challenging. So if you find a way to just embed into what they're already doing, it's much easier.
This is such a out-of-box solution because whoever I was speaking to, they were saying, hey, I just look up at the Gartner and I'm like, okay, the top thing, I just get it, and then my team was going to figure out how to implement it. And I don't think many security leaders really open to going out there, finding something that is going to, as you said, sort of tailor to your needs and really make it work. I think it's a completely different school of thought when it comes to, finding solution like this. So it's very interesting, very intriguing. And as you said, so it was your experience at Elastic that encouraged you to afterwards advise startups and navigate the global teams. How would you advise companies today that have such a global presence to have great security posture?
There's not one straight answer.
I wish there was.
I wish there was. It would make life extremely easy or much easier. I think for me, it's ensuring that you're looking at your organization and understanding both how it operates, how does it make money, what is the kind of tech stack that you're using, how do your teams operate. And I find security leaders have the most challenge if they come into a place and go, I've been successful in my past, this is what I've done at the last 3 organizations I worked in. I'm going to do all of that here. Yeah. That is not going to necessarily be successful. And it's really making sure that as a security leader, you understand the business, you understand the company, and you're open and proactively trying to implement security controls and a security posture that works within that organization.
And how do you come to creating your own teams, right? You just mentioned that if someone is exactly trying to replicate whatever they did previously, that might be a bit challenging. What kind of approach do you use when you sort of assemble your own team that is going to become your supporters and your army against the attackers?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's looking for a few key traits in individuals. Curiosity, open to learning is certainly fundamental. But the one that's hardest to find are folks that are willing and comfortable challenging themselves. Things are moving so fast, and being comfortable that, hey, I just spent 6 months putting this whole process in place, and something happens, whether it was in the business or a new threat vector, the next day that makes that totally worthless. And so being comfortable that it's not anything bad on them. It's just this is the nature of change, and looks at it more as an opportunity of, all right, let's see how we can do this better, and not as, I just spent 6 months and it's all wasted, and now I'm just, I need to do something else. But it's that, being energized by finding new or better ways of approaching things, challenging each other, being comfortable, being open to lots of inputs, and recognizing that we all have different skills, different experiences. And if we work together, we can achieve something far greater than what we could all do individually. And so just finding folks that want to kind of operate in that type of environments. And when you find them, you have an extremely powerful team. But it also, I know sometimes folks come into the environment and while they think that's the type of environment they want to operate in, turns out that it's not, and they prefer something different. And so it's also being pretty aggressive in helping those folks find an environment that is more aligned to how they want to operate, and just continuing that cycle.
Yeah, I think whatever, like let's say you just learn something and then you kind of have to unlearn it. It's not necessarily worthless, because at the end of the day, there are certain patterns that keep on emerging. They can be completely opposite, but then you do learn something. Do you think, is it question of ego of certain individuals, whether, or I don't know, kind of the way you're built, if you're made for security or you're not made for security? Do you believe in this or not really?
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily built or not built for security. I think it's broader technology in that space, but it's also back to, there's the concept of the growth mindset. And I think folks that have that do very well in security because they recognize that they're always, learning something, or they get excited by the challenges, versus folks that have more of a closed mindset. And it's just, oh, well, I did this and it didn't work. So now, whatever their thought process is. But it's kind of really finding folks with that growth mindset and bringing them into the team.
And you've been in the space already for quite some time. I'm sure there are certain wins, certain regrets. But if, let's say, you could give advice to your younger self, what you would have done differently in this space, and maybe you would have made slightly different decision, what would you advise to younger folks looking to enter the field?
For myself, I used to say that I would have received a different undergraduate degree in computer science or something. But as I've progressed in my career, I don't feel that way anymore. And I find the kind of business knowledge with the accounting degree and kind of business tech with the MIS and my own experiences, and then adding the JD into it, I bring a very well-rounded perspective into security. And I wouldn't have that if I had not done and started the path in accounting. So I've been very mindful in my career decisions, where at this point, there's not anything that I would regret from a kind of career path decision perspective. There's certainly technical changes and things, and priority in certain roles and things where I might have done things differently. But from a overall career perspective, there's not anything that I would regret. I had some general vision of what I wanted to do, certainly when I got into security, but I was just very open to recognizing that the world is changing and there's going to be opportunities that don't even exist. The CISO role didn't exist when I was in college. And so just being open to go where I find unique and interesting things. I've taken roles, looking from a career perspective, I've taken roles where I take a pay cut, whether that's just to get into a space that I know I need to get some experience. And so my recommendation for folks today is, that speed of change is even more rapid than it was when I was early in my career. And it's being open to just looking at, if you find something that's interesting that you want to try, go do it. Don't necessarily pause and step, and be okay, whether it's taking a pay cut or taking a level down, if you see it as something that you can get some very valuable experience that would help you further in your career. And it's not always an upward movement either. Sometimes it's lateral. Sometimes it's, I had been a manager for a while, and I say that the best role I ever took to help me be a better leader was I was an individual contributor, and I managed a $50 million security improvement program to just kind of up-level everything in organization. So I had all of the accountability, zero responsibility, and I had to work on just communication and influence skills just to get people on board and working towards a common goal. And once I finished that role and then moved back into leadership, I had a very different perspective and I had very different approaches. So it's really looking at everything and understanding what can you learn from that and what skills, and recognizing that it's not always in one direction. Yeah,
it's how to say, not only shifting up, but also sort of going left and right. That's one interesting approach, because as I speak to a lot of people that ask, hey, how do I get into the space? And you just really pushing. Sometimes it's about, taking on the new initiatives. And I think the general trend that I noticed, whoever I was speaking to, is taking unexpected projects. Unexpected projects that at the end of the day turned sometimes certain careers 360 that they wouldn't expect it. And back at that time, cybersecurity wasn't really a degree that many people studied. Do you think that studying accounting and everything gave you a certain edge that other people didn't have, that later on you thought, that's why I studied accounting and you haven't, and that's why I'm where I am?
For me, as the security team and the security leadership role evolved to be and needing to be more aligned or more in tune with the business, that's where my accounting degree, my business background helped. I could more easily understand usually just how a company operates, how a company makes money from a budgeting perspective. Even within the InfoSec team, I understood kind of what was happening behind the scenes in the budgeting cycle and help maximize what I can do with my budget is looking at timing and things like that, because I understood everything that was happening on the back end. And it's, again, just brings a different perspective to the conversations, and I think helps me be in the mindset of a user that's not living in the security world every day.
That is super valuable, because you have to speak the same language as senior executives, board level, because they're like, okay, you want a new tool. Why? And you're like, because it's going to cut your revenue. Or having, I guess, being closer to the numbers that are associated with certain decision making is definitely impactful. Sort of being able to speak the same language. We have this little tradition on our podcast, Mandy, where typically our previous guest would ask question to our next guest. So our previous guest asked, what was the hardest thing you ever had to say no to, and what were the consequences?
I guess the one thing, so I got my JD, went to law school, and I enjoyed it. I was never planning to practice law specifically. I went for the value and the different perspectives I knew it could provide in my day-to-day role as a security leader, but had the opportunity to continue that and go get an LLM, which is a master's in law. And at that point, there were some programs that were much more cybersecurity focused. And I said no to that, and I thought I would regret it, but I don't. And so that actually surprised me. I use what I learned in law school every day, but the way the industry has evolved, the way the legal space has evolved, I learned more kind of staying in my role and not moving more to just more formal education than I would have. And so I was surprised by that outcome. I was really disappointed when I had to say no to that at the time, but turned out to be pretty good.
Are you a strong believer into like going deeper into formal education or learning on the job? What's your take? Which one is better or worse?
Both are extremely valuable, and I've certainly done both. For myself, I learn better in a more structured format, and so that's why I tend to go more to school for classes and degrees. Other folks are the exact opposite, and they learn more, self-taught and experiential. So for me, it's find out how best do you learn and do whatever that is.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as every security stack is very individual, every environment is very individual. I guess our learnings also have to be very individual. What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Next guest, I would say, what experience did you have in your childhood that you see has had the most impact on kind of you as an adult?
Well, I'm really, really tempted to ask you this same question because I'm sure there is an incredible answer behind it. But I think I'll leave it as a hint to our listeners as we talk.
I gave the answer somewhere in the past 45 minutes.
Well, Mandy, thank you so much for coming to our Be Fearless podcast. You were clearly very fearless throughout your whole journey, whether it was learning and shifting from one industry to another, which is a big, bold decision to make, staying at certain companies for 13 years or longer than that, advising startups, and just having this resilience to really identifying what are the moving parts and what are the very important trends that people have to pay close attention to, rather than being overwhelmed with all the noise of the industry. So it's been amazing to talk to you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.